Coups and Kings, the tale of an unstable Thailand. Thailand was never colonized by European powers. In your face, Great Britain.
Oh!
The kings actually originated from Hindu beliefs as kind of having a god-king figure, someone who was insanely higher than everyone else. That is about the mid-14th century, when they're known as Siam until about 1934. And we're not exactly sure why. Major threats for young Thailand was for the Burmese kingdoms, kind of like an annoying older brother that's just kind of over there and brooding. In about 1767, the Burmese kingdom destroyed Siam, kind of like rah, rah, very, very fierce and angry. Not too long after that, though, thankfully, the military commander Taskin made himself king after overpowering the Burmese. His former military commander, well, I know I'm going to mess up all these. We're just going to call him Mr. C. Mr. C founded the C dynasty, which has continued to this present day. Then after him, Mr. King M accepted more modern ideas and allowed himself to be seen with commoners, kind of breaking the law that had previously been there, where they could not even gaze upon his face. Maybe it was just so shiny. I mean, kings. Pretty impressive. After that, the modern military was created because of threat from France in the late 19th centuries, and before then it had just kind of been the Burmese, but now France and Europe and all that. Getting in there and messing with their feng shui. Also in the late 19th century, around the formation of the modern military, Mr. King C made remarkable reforms, creating the modern state of Thailand as his lasting legacy. The king after him, Mr. V, promoted Thai nationalism, loyalty to nation, religion, and the king. Then in 1932, there was a bloodless coup, which begins the long and over-enthusiastic beginnings of Thailand's many, many coups. And this one, they persuaded the king to rule under a constitution. From that point on, it was no longer an absolute monarchy. In 1939, a military dictator took over the then Siam and named it Thailand instead, kind of running off of the coattails of the nationalism recently poured into Thailand's nation. In 1951, there was a coup, again. In 1957, a field marshal staged a coup and took over the government. In 1960, the king came back into public eye. He had become kind of eclipsed since 1932, as his role in government was very low in power, and few people had any reason to pay attention to him. And so he came back to become a significant institution in Thailand again in about 1960. On October 14th, 1973, a very great moment for Thailand happened when students overthrew a corrupt government with the king's support. They rioted in the streets and were very, very done with the government at the time, and the king really encouraged the government to leave before things got really messy. And so Thailand kind of sees this moment in history as a moment where the people were able to interfere in the government, and the king was on their side. In 1980, there was a new government. The military shared power with Parliament through the mediation of the king. It's kind of like when two little kids are fighting and their mom needs to come out and tell them to play nice. But he's a king, so it's cool. And then in 1991, there was a coup. Again. In April 2006, the elections were boycotted by the opposing parties of the one party that was probably going to win by a landslide. So instead of having an election, people kind of chilled in the streets angrily. And it was one knock against having a solid government system in Thailand.
Regarding the structure of Thailand, the country predominantly functions in such a unique fashion, in great part to the country having never been colonized. Bearing that in mind, Thailand is a unitary government with a constitutional monarchy in place. The government itself is known as the Royal Thai Government and has been considered bizarre as the result of the country remaining stable despite the revision or replacement of its constitution 17 times. The current king of Thailand, King Phumthien Anduyet, is the longest reigning monarch and has been serving since 1946. The head of the monarchy in Thailand is also granted the title Chief of State. The head of government, however, is known as the Prime Minister and head of cabinet. The position has been established since 1936 upon the emergence of Thailand as a constitutional monarchy. The current Prime Minister is Prayuth Chan-o-cha, who is affiliated with the National Council for Peace and Order. The NCPO is a military junta and, as a result, elects the prime ministers who have been served in the military. Appointed as prime minister preceding a coup d'etat in 2006. Prayuth is the primary figure who staged the coup, established the NCPO, and named himself as the current prime minister. While the monarchy is hereditary, the prime minister must also be appointed by the monarch, with the acceptance of the National Legislative Assembly. The most recent coup d'etat in 2014 has rendered the legislative branch of Thailand in transition after having replaced the bicameral National Assembly with 220 members. It is predicted to not have a certain duration or elected process of officials. The last Senate election to take place transpired on March 2014, while the House of Representatives last held their election on February 2nd, 2014. These elections were declared invalid by the Constitutional Court. Thailand's Supreme Court of Justice holds one position for a court president and 6 vice presidents, as well as judges, of which are categorized and designated tasks in either civil or criminal divisions. The Constitutional Court has 1 court president and 8 judges.
When one thinks of Thailand's political players, 2 names come to mind: Thaksin Shinawatra and his younger sister Yingluck. Thaksin, a telecommunications billionaire, gained favor amongst the rural poor and thus won the 2001 Prime Minister election. However, when one thinks of Mr. Thaksin, one must go to 2006 and one of Thailand's biggest political scandals of recent history. His family decided to sell shares of one of Thailand's biggest telecommunications groups, ShinCorp, to Singaporean investors. By doing so, his family gained $1.9 billion, but angered many, many Thais. Amidst large-scale protest, he decided to call for a snap general election in which much of the opposition declined or boycotted. But it wasn't for long, and then he returned to power. By doing so, a few months later, the military decided to intervene and strip him of all of his titles and powers, and freeze all of his assets, over $1.9 billion. This all transpired when he was outside the country at a United Kingdom's embassy meeting. From there he was declared a criminal, and if he returned to Thailand, he would receive harsh penalties, including prison sentences. Following Thaksin's exile, many people loyal to him went to the streets, and thus the red shirt protests began. These turned violent, and over 100 people perished within the entirety of the protests. Many people, especially the rural poor, enjoyed Mr. Thaksin and his policies, and thus, in 2011, his younger sister, Yingluck, came to power through the Thu Thai Party. Because so, Miss Yingluck became Thailand's first female prime minister. But she is also a Shinawatra, because of which many people suspect her to be a mere puppet of her older brother Thaksin. A rice subsidy policy went under, wherein many people believed that it was filled with corruption, and many farmers were left out of pocket at the government's expense. Many people also believed that she was just a mere puppet. Seemed to be quite true when she tried to propose a bill stating that people who were responsible for the deaths of civilian protesters in 2010 would go free. Many people assumed that this would extend over to allow her older brother to return into the country without receiving any penalties or jail time. Later, the Constitutional Court forced her to step down when they found her guilty of abusing her power. Weeks later, the military once again seized power and suspended the constitution. This has been the 12th successful coup within Thailand's history. So once again, another Shinawatra was deemed to be corrupt, stripped of her power, and the military has taken over.
Coup.